Hi, good morning and good evening to our dear friends across the globe. Welcome to the webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is PADERs and PSURs, Nuances and Beyond. During the post-authorization phase, the global safety experience of the medical product is presented to the regulatory authorities in a periodic manner in accordance with their rigorous, stringent regulations. Needless to say, a comprehensive and in-depth review of all the new and emerging safety information is vital to ascertain the benefit and risk ratio of the drug. Team AWINSA with us is with its scrupulous knowledge of regulatory requirements, honed by years of experience, highlights the tips and tricks of preparing robust PSURs and PADERs in this webinar. Before we begin, I would like to draw your attention to some of the housekeeping rules. Today's webinar is presented by AWINSA Life Sciences, a global provider of pharmacovigilance, clinical safety, medical monitoring, medical information, and medical writing services, manned by people with discernment and an eye for quality. Team AWINSA ensures astute analysis of safety reports so that clinical scenarios emerge in perspicuity. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to cover a few housekeeping rules. You are welcome to post your questions during the webinar. We will do our level best to address them. In case we are not able to answer due to time constraint, we will try to respond to you via email. Webinar will be available for download on demand after a couple of days. Today's presenters are Dr. Sanjeev Miglani and Dr. Mugdha Chopra. Introducing the speakers now. Dr. Sanjeev is the founder and director of AWINSA Life Sciences. He is MD in internal medicine and has over 20 years of experience in the field of medicine, pharmacovigilance, and clinical research. In his last assignment, he was the Vice President of Safety and Medical Affairs at APSUR. Just before joining APSUR, he was the Vice President for Pharmacovigilance and Medical Writing at Accenture and had been in senior leadership roles in other companies like CIDP, CliniRx, and Ranbaxy. He has also worked as senior resident in cardiology and medicine department. Dr. Mugdha Chopra, she is the co-founder and director of AWINSA Life Sciences and has over 16 years of experience in pharmacovigilance and clinical research industry. She was Associate Vice President for USPV and Clinical Safety at APSUR in her last role and was overseeing the delivery and PV operations for areas including but not limited to case processing, aggregate reporting, literature monitoring, signal detection, and pharmacovigilance consultation. Before joining APSUR, she was with Ranbaxy as a compliance lead. She comes with an extensive experience in various safety databases like Argus Safety, RSG, and has also met the challenge of business continuity planning and data restoration during the database failure. At this time, I'm going to hand over the floor to Dr. Mugdha, and I have all my eyes and ears on the screen. Over to you, Mugdha.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for the nice introduction. In the webinar today, we will be talking about the periodic adverse drug experience reports and periodic safety update reports. I'll be speaking on periodic adverse drug experience reports, and Dr. Sanjeev Miglani will be talking about the periodic safety update reports. We'll be covering the following topics in today's webinar: objectives of the periodic reports, principles and regulations of PADERs, and the sectional review of PADERs, which I'll be talking about. Dr. Sanjeev Miglani will walk us through the regulations and sectional review of the periodic safety update reports. Well, before I start my presentation, I would like to lay down the principles why any periodic report is required to be submitted. From safety perspective, comprehensive and critical analysis of the evolving information on the risks and benefits must be identified and reported. All of this is clearly reflected in the aggregate reports, which are required to be prepared as a part of the pharmacovigilance requirement. Aggregate reports are the reports which emphasize on the evaluation of the safety profile and benefit risk of the product. And the aggregate report, so as to say, is the process which reviews the cumulative safety information from a wide range of sources on a periodic basis and submit the findings to the regulatory authorities. Aggregate reports are required both during the pre-marketing and the post-marketing stages of a product. PADERs and PSURs, these are the two aggregate reports which are prepared during the post-marketing stages of the product. So as we are progressing in pharmacovigilance, it's all about evaluation of risks versus the benefits at the periodic intervals and presenting them in specific formats as defined by the regulations in different countries. We have to highlight the risks or the relevant new safety information of the product. Another important objective is to establish whether information recorded during the reporting period is in accordance with the previously existing knowledge of the drug safety, and it helps in determining whether any changes should be made to the product labeling. The most important objective of periodic report is to evaluate the benefit risk profile of the approved medicinal product in the light of the new and changing post-approval information. There are different regulations or guidelines governing the preparation and submission of periodic adverse drug experience reports in the United States. 21 CFR 314.80, that is post-marketed reporting of adverse drug experiences for new drug applications. Similarly, 21 CFR 314.98, it is for the post-marketing reports for the generic drugs. Post-marketing reporting of adverse experiences for biologics is detailed in 21 CFR 600.80. And as we all know, we have a draft guidance document published by FDA in March 2001 regarding the post-marketing safety reporting for human drugs and biological products. This guidance document provides the details regarding the format, requirements, and content of the PADERs to be submitted to US FDA. As I mentioned in the beginning that there are different timelines and frequency of submission of the periodic reports based on the regulatory requirements in different countries. Post-marketing periodic reports are required to be submitted to the FDA for each approved NDA, ANDA, and BLA. And they are due quarterly for the first 3 years after US approval of the application and annually thereafter. Periodic reports due quarterly must be submitted within 30 calendar days of the last day of the reporting quarter. Reports due annually, they must be submitted each year within 60 calendar days of the anniversary date of the US approval of the application of the drug or the biological product. So each page of the PADER, they should be numbered and include the name and the NDA or the ANDA number of the periodic report is for the drug product. For the biological products, the periodic report should include the name and the submission tracking number, that is the STN of the biological product. That is the requirement of the PADER or in the format of the PADER as per the US FDA requirements. Before I go into the sectional review of the PADERs, I would like to highlight few regulatory aspects of the PADERs. Initial non-15-day reports should be included in the periodic report in a separate section from non-15-day follow-up reports. All initial and follow-up information obtained for an adverse experience with a given periodic reporting period should be combined and submitted in the periodic report as one initial non-15-day report. What does this mean? It means that an initial non-15-day report and a non-15-day follow-up report describing the same adverse experience should not be submitted in the same periodic report. So when I say non-15-day report for submission in the PADERs, these include spontaneously reported cases originating in the US, that is serious listed, non-serious listed, and non-serious unlisted cases. Serious listed or non-serious cases coming from literature, or any country other than the US, that is the foreign cases, they are not required to be included in the PADER. Another important point, and which makes sense as well, is that serious unexpected adverse experience reports should not be reported to the US FDA again, as an E2B report via ESG gateway was already submitted to FDA as a 15-day report earlier. So it is not required to be reported again along with the PADER. Non-15-day cases, that is domestic spontaneous, serious listed and non-serious cases, are the only reports which are required to be submitted as E2B reports via ESG gateway along with the PADER. If no adverse experiences were identified for the drug or the biological product for the time period involved and no regulatory actions concerning safety were taken anywhere in the world where the product is marketed, the periodic report can state this and can be submitted to the FDA along with the copy of the current US product labeling. There are certain waivers that FDA grants to the applicant holders for PADERs, and one of the waivers is submission of FDA Form 3500A for non-serious expected adverse experiences, or we can say submission of non-serious expected adverse experiences as E2B reports to the US FDA along with the PADER, as nowadays we no longer submit the MedWatch forms to the FDA. All the submissions to the FDA, whether they are 15-day alert report or they are non-15-day alert reports, they are all submitted to the FDA electronically via ESG gateway. So the applicants are encouraged to request a waiver for submission of individual case reports of non-serious expected adverse experiences that at a minimum contain the 4 basic elements. I mean, they should be valid cases. In such cases, applicants should maintain records of these non-serious expected adverse experiences in their safety database. And the FDA may request that an applicant submit these cases to the agency whenever they are requesting it. And when they request, they should be submitted to the FDA within 5 calendar days after the receipt of the request by the FDA. Applicants who obtain a waiver for the requirement to submit individual case safety reports of non-serious expected adverse experiences would still be expected to submit information on these adverse experiences to FDA in the summary tabulation section of the PADER, which means is that even if there is a waiver which is granted by the FDA not to submit these non-serious expected cases as a part of the PADER or as E2B reports to the PADER because they have the waiver, still summary tabulation which is required to be included in the PADER needs to include these events from the non-serious expected cases as well. The FDA does not intend to, grant waiver request for new biological molecular entities within 1 year of licensure or for the blood products or plasma derivatives or for vaccines even. They believe that it is important to continue periodic review of all individual case safety reports of adverse experiences for these products to identify any safety problem due to lot-to-lot variations and also to monitor the safety of the newly approved biological products. There can also be a waiver which is granted for submission of PADERs in the PSUR format. Applicant holders can request a waiver to submit the PADERs in PSUR format as described in ICH E2C. However, in these situations, FDA expects certain additional requirements to be followed by the applicant holders. Like if all the dosage forms and formulations for the active substance as well as indications are combined in one PSUR, this information should be separated into specific sections of the report when such separation is appropriate to, accurately portray the safety profile of the specific dosage forms. For example, the information about a specific dosage form, for example, the oral dosage form, and for the same molecule, it is the ophthalmic drop dosage form. So these should not be combined in one specific PSUR. One copy of the PSUR should be submitted for each approved ANDA or NDA whose product is covered in the PSUR. Because PADERs work under the logic that PADERs have to be submitted for each approved ANDA or NDA or BLA. Non-15-day cases that are required to be submitted, they should be submitted even if the reports are submitted in the PSUR format. And a waiver for submission of certain non-serious expected adverse experiences, as I was mentioning before, that they can be requested from the FDA. So, but in case it is not requested or in case there is no waiver from the FDA to the applicant holder for submission of non-serious expected cases, these cases should be included and should be submitted even if the PADER is submitted as a part of in the PSUR format. Another important recommendation from FDA is that a summary tabulation should be included as an appendix, listing all the spontaneously reported US individual case safety reports from consumers if such cases are not already included in the PSUR. Summary tabulations should be presented by system organ class of all the adverse experience terms and counts of the occurrences, and should be segregated as serious unexpected or serious expected or non-serious unexpected and non-serious expected cases. Another important point which has to be included, which is a recommendation from FDA, is that a narrative should be included as an appendix that includes implies the changes to the approved US labeling for the dosage forms covered by the PSUR based on the new information in the PSUR. A copy of the most recently approved US product labeling for the product covered by the PSUR also has to be included. So these are specific recommendations from the FDA that even if the applicant holder is submitting the PADER in the PSUR format, still there are certain specific requirements from FDA perspective which have to be followed or which have to be taken care of when PADERs are being submitted in PSUR format. Another waiver is regarding the submission date and the frequency of the reports if submitted in the PSUR format. As far as the submission of PADERs is concerned, these are submitted on a quarterly basis from the US approval date of the product. But applicants can request a waiver to submit the PSUR to the FDA based on the month and the day of the international birth date of the product, instead of the month and the day of the anniversary date of the US approval of the product. The waiver request should specify that these PSURs should be submitted to the FDA within 60 calendar days of the data log point, that is the month and the date of the international birth date of the product, or any other day which is agreed on between the applicant and the FDA. So the regulations require a PADER to contain the narrative summary and analysis of the information in the report and an analysis of the 15-day alert report submitted during the reporting period. Non-15-day reports for each spontaneously reported adverse experience occurring in the United States that was not reported as a 15-day alert report, and a history of the actions taken since the last report because of any adverse experience. The information contained within a post-marketing periodic report, that is a PADER, should be divided into 4 sections and should be clearly separated by the identifying tabs. If information for one or one of these sections is not included by the applicant, so it should be clearly mentioned that why this information is not being provided in the PADER. If information is not available, that should be clearly specified. These are different sections of the PADER. PADER format, as expected by the US FDA for their regulatory requirements, should have 4 sections. Section 1 is the narrative summary and analysis section. Section 2 being narrative discussions of action taken. Section 3 is index line listing, and section 4 is FDA form 3500A, which is basically non-15-day cases included in the PADER. There are certain appendices also to be included in the PADER, and obviously I'll be talking about these sections and these appendices in detail in my subsequent slides. Section 1, narrative summary and analysis section, should include a narrative summary and analysis of the information in the PADER and analysis of 15-day reports, that is serious unexpected adverse experiences, submitted during the reporting period. This section should include the information about the number of non-15-day initial adverse experience reports and the number of non-15-day follow-up reports which are there in the PADER and the time period covered by the report. The non-15-day cases cover serious expected, non-serious unexpected, and non-serious expected cases which are reported spontaneously, and that too specifically in the US, that is domestic cases. Any serious expected cases or non-serious cases which are reported in literature, or any such spontaneous case with country of origin other than the US, that is the foreign cases, they are not required to be included in the PADER. This section 1 should also include a list of 15-day reports submitted to the FDA during the reporting period. 15-day reports submitted under that particular NDA or ANDA or BLA. They can be from any report source, that is, it can be spontaneous report, it can be literature report, or it can be clinical trial report, and it can be either domestic or foreign report. So this line listing of 15-day reports, which is a part of the PADER line listing, which is generated from the safety database, they should include the manufacturer report number, which is the unique identification number, the adverse experience term, and the date the 15-day report was submitted to the US FDA. If both initial and follow-up reports were submitted to the FDA during the current reporting period, both the submission dates should get reflected in the PADER line listing for these 15-day reports. There is another list of cases which need to be included in the section 1 of the PADER, that is the list of the cases submitted to the FDA under another NDA or ANDA or BLA. This list includes the cases in which the suspect drug or the biologic product for which the PADER is being prepared was listed as one of the suspect products, but the report was submitted to the US FDA under another license number of the applicant holder. This generally occurs when there are multiple suspect products and the suspect product for which we are preparing the PADER is one of the suspect product, but not the primary or not that suspect product under which the report was submitted to the FDA as a 15-day alert report. In case there is no such case, it should be clearly specified in the report that no such cases exist for that particular PADER. This section should also include the tabulation of the events by the system organ class. Just to make it very clear, tabulation is always at the event level and the listings are at the case level. And this is applicable both for the PADERs and the PSURs. So this section should include a summary tabulation by body system, that is the different system organ classes, that is cardiovascular or endocrine or renal or gastrointestinal. They should include all the adverse experience terms and counts of occurrences submitted during the reporting period. And the information should be taken from 15-day reports submitted to the FDA, non-15-day reports submitted in the periodic report, reports forwarded to the applicant by the FDA, which means that reports which are shared by the FDA to the applicant holder, and any non-serious expected adverse experience not submitted to the FDA but maintained on file by the applicant in case applicant has a waiver for these reports. For the adverse experiences term product interaction, the interacting products should be identified in the tabulation. Again, this section section 1 should also include the narrative discussion of 15-day alert reports. This is another point which I would like to highlight here, which is the difference between the PADERs and the PSURs. PADERs require the detailed discussion of all 15-day alert cases in the PADER report. However, for PSURs, detailed discussion is required only for those cases which are considered to be of relevant safety concerns. This section of PADER includes a narrative discussion of the clinical significance of 15-day alert reports submitted during the reporting period and of any increased reporting frequency of serious expected adverse experiences when in the judgment of the applicant. So if they believe that it is clinically meaningful change in the frequency or there is a clinical significance, it should be clearly specified and explained in this particular section. This narrative should assess clinical significance by the type of adverse experience, by the body system, and the overall product safety relating the new information received during this reporting period to what was already known about that product in the previous reporting periods. The narrative should also state what further actions the applicant plans to undertake based on the information gained during the reporting period and include the time period for completing the actions. That is when the applicant plans to start and when to finish the action and submit the information to the agency. Second section in the PADER is the narrative discussion of the actions taken. So the narrative discussion should indicate, based on the information learned during the reporting period, whether the applicant believes that no change in the product current approved labeling is warranted, or there are safety related issues which need to be addressed in the approved product labeling. If changes in the approved product labeling are under the consideration by the FDA, the date and the number of the supplemental application submitted to address the labeling changes should be stated in this particular section. And this section should include a copy of the current US product labeling and a list of any labeling changes made during the reporting period. And just to specify here, the labeling changes to be included in this section should be the ones which are relevant from safety perspective. Section 2 should also include the summary of important regulatory actions, including the foreign regulatory actions, for example, any new warnings or limitations in the indications and the use of the product. And this should also include any communication of the new safety information, for example, a Dear Doctor letter. Another important information to be included in this section 2 is the list of studies initiated by the company during the reporting period. And this includes the company sponsored trial, which are focused on safety, with a brief narrative describing any safety trial or epidemiological studies initiated in response to any significant new information that might affect the safety of the product. And this section just needs to have the brief summary of these particular studies which are initiated during the reporting period. Section 3 of the PADER is the index line listing. This section includes non-15-day cases included in the section 4 of the periodic report. And the line listing for each non-15-day case submitted should include the manufacturer report number, which is the unique report identification number, adverse experience term, identification of the interacting products for any product interaction listed as an adverse experience. Earlier this section also required page numbers of the MedWatch forms to be included in the PADER line listing. But since all the non-15-day cases are now submitted as E2B reports via ESG gateway, this is not required to be, page numbers are not required to be included. This section is subdivided into list of serious listed initial reports, list of non-serious unlisted initial reports, list of non-serious listed initial reports, then in the follow-ups, list of serious listed follow-up reports, list of non-serious unlisted follow-up reports, and list of non-serious listed follow-up reports. So basically, if we see here is that the index line listing is basically divided into the non-15-day initial reports and the follow-up reports in different sections. All these lists of domestic spontaneous cases with the required parameters as required by the US FDA are generated from the standard reports configured in the validated safety database. Section 4 of the PADER, though named as FDA Form 3500A, as per the guidance document, but it includes a list of the spontaneously reported adverse experiences that occurred in the United States during the reporting period and includes serious expected, non-serious unexpected, and non-serious expected cases. So the applicants are encouraged to request a waiver of the requirement to submit individual case safety reports of non-serious expected adverse experiences for drugs and certain biological products, as we were discussing in the waivers which are granted by the FDA. So in the PADER's adverse experiences due to lack of failure, due to failure to produce the expected action or the lack of effect, they should be also be included in this particular section. And for individual case safety reports of serious expected adverse experiences, the FDA says that the applicant should include, or they encourage them to include, the relevant hospital discharge summaries or the death certificates, as well as list of any other relevant documents as for the serious unexpected adverse experiences. If you see the slide, this is basically the appendices of the periodic adverse drug experience reports. And so basically this is PADER line listings, which is generated from any safety database, including the list of the 15-day reports by the system organ class, the cases sent to the FDA under another product licenses or any other NDA or ANDA, summary tabulation of the events which are reported by the system organ class, and the index line listing for all the non-15-day cases which we discussed earlier. And another appendix is basically the current product labeling for the product for which the PADER is being prepared and submitted to the US FDA. Yeah, so this was all for periodic adverse drug experience reports in my presentation today. I will now hand over to Dr. Sanjeev Meglani to discuss about the periodic safety update reports. Sanjeev?
Thanks, Mugdha, for this nice presentation. So, today I'm going to talk about some of the basic objectives and principles of periodic safety update reports, and I'll also walk you through the sectional review of the PSUR. Well, I think to begin with, I would like to lay down the important objectives of the PSUR, and as Mugdha also explained, that in any periodic report, the main idea is to provide the updates to the regulatory authority, and all of these updates are relevant from the safety perspective. So the main objective of any PSUR, irrespective of any regulatory authority, I am going to focus more on the EU PSUR, but overall, if we look from any regulatory authority perspective, the objective of any PSUR is to present a kind of exhaustive, concise, and critical analysis of the risk-benefit balance of the medicinal product, taking into account new or emerging safety information in the context of cumulative information on the risk and benefit. So, as a marketing authorization holder, every company needs to kind of continuously evaluate the risk-benefit profile. Of course, they do the signaling, but then this signaling process done by the signaling team needs to be kind of aligned with the medical writing team who prepares the periodic reports, because at the end of the day, when we are providing any periodic report, all kind of signaling data or any kind of risk profile, risk benefit assessment that is done, so it needs to be mentioned in that PSUR. So PSUR is basically a tool for post authorization evaluation at different time points. So as Mugdha explained, for the US FDA, the requirement is to provide quarterly PADERs for the first 3 years and then annually thereafter. So similarly, in other countries like in Europe, there are different time points. So they may require at the time of 6 monthly PSU, they may require at the time of 6 months, or maybe sometimes they require at the time of renewal. So different regulatory authorities have different expectations at different time points for the PSURs. So in the EU, the PSURs are based on GP Module 7. So in the GP Module 7, they have given all the different kind of structures or the sections within the PSUR. PSUR format is aligned with the PBR format as seen in the ICH E2C R2 guideline. Well, a very important point here that I would want to emphasize is that in order to increase the shared use of resources between different regulatory authorities in the member states or different competent authorities in the member states, a single assessment of PSURs is performed in the EU for different medicinal products containing the same active substance or the same combination of active substances authorized in more than one member state, for which a union reference date and frequency of submission of PSURs has been established. So the agency provides a list of union reference dates and frequency of submissions which are legally binding. If we look into the frequency and timelines of PSUR submission from EU perspective, GP Module 7 clearly mentions that the PSURs have to be submitted within 70 calendar days of the data log point for the PSURs which are covering interval up to 12 months, or if the interval is exactly 12 months. So for all of these kind of scenarios, the PSURs have to be given within 70 calendar days to the authorities. If the reporting period or the interval is more than 12 months, so the PSURs have to be submitted to the authorities within 90 calendar days of the data log point. And of course, ad hoc PSURs can always be requested by the competent authorities as per their requirements, and then they have to be generally submitted within 90 calendar days of the data log point. Well, GB module 7 clearly gives some of the principles for the evaluation of the risk-benefit profile or assessment within the PSURs, and I would like to emphasize some of those important points. A very important point that needs to be taken into consideration is that a benefit risk evaluation of any medicinal product should be carried out throughout the life cycle of the product to promote and protect public health and to enhance the safety of the patient through effective risk minimization. Well, whenever there is a marketing authorization given by the regulatory authorities, it is imperative to continue evaluating the benefits and risk of the medicinal products in actual use or long-term use to confirm that the risk-benefit balance remains favorable. And the scope of the benefit information should include both the clinical trial and the post-authorization real-world data in the authorized indications. Well, wherever relevant, the data related to a particular indication, dosage form, route of administration, or dosing regimen should be presented in a separate section of PSUR and addressed accordingly. Also, we need to see that whenever we are talking about the EU PSURs, a single PSUR is required generally for any medicinal product or active moiety, and it should cover all the dosages, all the formulation, or any route of administration. So the EU PSURs are not required to be prepared separately for different formulations or different ANDAs like we see in the US FDA. So, but yes, there can be some exceptions. Maybe there can be some exception where maybe there is a kind of a altogether different formulation for entirely different indication, and maybe the marketing authorization holder has a rationale. So there could be some exceptions, but generally the golden rule is that a single PSUR is required for an active moiety or for a molecule, which would cover all the routes of, which would cover all the formulation, dosages, route of administration, or even the indications. Well, if there is a kind of a exception wherein a separate PHR is being prepared, so the agreement should be obtained from the relevant regulatory authority or the competent authority in the EU at the time of authorization. Well, another important point that needs to be taken into account for the EU PHR is that the case narratives generally are required to be given only whenever there is an important signal or there is a kind of a important event which could be relevant from safety perspective. And they are basically not like something to be taken directly from the COMS narrative. Idea is to provide a kind of a clinical meaningful picture from those cases, and that's how it should be presented. And each report should include interval as well as the cumulative data. Also, as we know that reference safety information has an important role to play, whether we are talking about any PSUR or DSUR, or for that matter, any periodic report. First of all, when I say the reference safety information, it's basically part of the company core data sheet, which is the company core safety information. And there are some specific sections of the CCSI which are kind of important from RSA perspective or the reference safety information perspective. If you look into the adverse event section, or say contraindication, or warnings and precautions, or pregnancy and lactation, or drug interaction, or overdose. So these are the sections wherein we find the safety information, and it's very important that the reference safety information is looked into very carefully in the PSUR. And of course, there is a section on changes to the RSI. So whenever there are those changes to the specific sections, I mean, like the adverse events or the contraindications or warning, precautions, pregnancy and lactation, drug interaction. So we have to see if there is a specific change in those sections, they are addressed appropriately in the PSUR or any periodic report. Whenever there is no CCDS or CCSI existing for a product, then in that case, the marketing authorization holder should clearly mention which particular SPC or the summary of product characteristics is being used as the safety document or the labeling document for that particular product. Also, a very important thing which every marketing authorization holder should ensure is that they should have proper quality systems and procedures to ensure that the PSURs are prepared appropriately. I mean, like the quality checks have to be implemented at all the levels, whether it is maintenance of RSI, whether it's maintenance of preparation of the report as such. So there should be proper written policies and procedures in the MH quality system, which should describe all of these processes. And the quality system should have a link between multiple stakeholders in the PSUR process to ensure appropriate coordination. Also, the responsible person for pharmacovigilance or maybe the QPPV should ensure that the training of the staff members is done regularly and appropriately, and the responsible person or the qualified person for pharmacovigilance should ensure that the PV personnel or the medical writing team or the quality personnel who are involved in the review or the quality control, so all of these people are adequately qualified, experienced, and trained, and their training records should demonstrate that the relevant training has been delivered prior to performing the PSUR activity. So these things are very important from any audit perspective, whether it's a MHRA audit or European audit, or even from the US FDA perspective. It's very important that the training records are appropriately documented for the people who are either preparing it or who are reviewing the periodic documents. Well, this is a busy slide, and it gives all the different sections of the PSUR, and I'll be talking about these sections briefly. But if we look into this particular sectional review of the PSUR, you can see that there are definitely a lot of sections compared to the PADERs. But then the idea of both the periodic report, whether we are preparing for the US or for the EU, is that at the end of the day, we should be able to make an inference if there are some new signals that are coming out, or if there is any change in the benefit risk profile. Of course, here the details are quite specifically mentioned in the regulation, but at the end of the day, in any periodic report, it's very important that we make a conclusion wherein we mention if the benefit risk profile is being changed, or if there is any kind of new signal that is going to impact the safety profile of the product. Well, for any periodic report, whether it's a DSUR or PBRR or PSUR, there is a executive summary that needs to be always prepared. And the idea of preparing an executive summary is to provide a concise summary of the content and the most important information. And basically, it should contain a kind of a brief introduction. It should talk about the medicinal product, therapeutic class, the mechanism of action, indication or the pharmaceutical formulation. It should also talk about the estimated cumulative clinical trial exposure in case the drug is also in the clinical trial phase, as well as post-marketing. So again, I think I would like to highlight a very important thing here. Whether it's a DSUR or PSUR, though we are talking today about PSUR, if the product is also in the clinical trial phase, it's important that the PSUR should also contain any kind of safety information coming from clinical trials. And in fact, when we go through the different sections, we'll realize that every information, whether it's coming from the post-marketing or from the clinical trial, is relevant as long as it is coming from safety perspective. So therefore, even the cumulative clinical trial exposure is also required to be given in the PSUR. So of course, in the different sections, but in the executive summary, it has to be mentioned. Then estimated interval and cumulative post-marketing exposure is required to be given. The countries in which the medicinal product is authorized. Of course, the executive summary also needs to give the summary of overall benefit risk evaluation, any actions taken and proposed for safety reasons, and the conclusion. Well, the first section is the introduction section. It should highlight the things like international birth date. It should have exact reporting period, because it's important to provide what exactly is the DLP, what exactly is the period covered in this particular periodic report. A brief description of the approved indication and population should be provided in the introduction section. It should, of course, talk about the medicinal product, the mode of action, therapeutic class, the dose, route of administration, and just in case there are some other PHRs also which are given, so they are also the rationale should be given, because as I mentioned earlier, that generally we need to just give a single PHR, but if there is an exception where a agreement is already done with the competent authority, so that rationale should be provided why there are some multiple PHRs given in a particular scenario. Then there is a worldwide marketing authorization approval status, and this section should contain a narrative, or it could have a table also. The format can have parameters like date of first authorization worldwide, indications, authorized dose, wherever this is authorized. So this has to be provided in the section 2, which is worldwide marketing authorization. Then if you see these sections, they are more or less similar to the DSURs that we discussed in the previous webinar. So even the PSUR has a section on action taken in the reporting period for the safety reason. And again, the important thing is that all of these things are from safety perspective. So any kind of significant actions related to safety that have been taken during the reporting interval globally have to be described in this section. And again, they have to be described from both post-marketing as well as clinical trials perspective. So say if there is a clinical trial going on for a particular product, which is both in the post-marketing as well as clinical trial. So any kind of action related to investigational use, whether it is a refusal to authorize the clinical trial, or whether there is a partial or complete clinical trial suspension, or there is an early termination of an ongoing trial because of any particular safety finding, or there is a significant lack of efficacy, or if there is a failure to obtain the marketing authorization for a tested indication, including the voluntary withdrawal of a marketing authorization application. So all of these things have to be described in this particular section. And if there are some actions related to any marketing experience, of course, they also have to be provided in this section. Say if there is a withdrawal or suspension of a marketing authorization due to some safety reason, or maybe there is a product defect or quality issue, and actions have been taken in terms of recall or maybe withdrawal of the authorization. So these things have to be mentioned in this particular section. If there are any risk management activities taken with regard to safety, say if there is a particular restriction on the distribution of the product, or maybe if there is a kind of a communication that has been given to the healthcare professionals in terms of safety. So all of these things have to be documented in this section. So the idea is to ensure that any kind of action taken by the sponsor or maybe by any regulatory authority with regard to safety, whether it's for post-marketing or whether it's for clinical trial, they have to be documented in this section. Then there is a section on changes to RSI, and as I mentioned, those specific sections like warnings or precautions, contraindications, the adverse event experience section, or drug interaction section, or overdose section. So all of these sections are important from safety perspective, and whenever there is any changes in the RSI section, so they have to be mentioned categorically in section 4. And if there is a kind of a clinical trial also going on, so of course even the IB changes are also required to be documented in this section. And a clear version of the reference document that is current at the time of data log point should be included in one of the appendices, and this appendix is 20.1. Then there is a section on estimated exposure and use patterns, and again it's very simple. If the product is in the clinical trials, we have to also provide the exposure data in the clinical trials. And of course, if the product is in the marketing, like launch is already done after approval, so we have to provide the data in terms of patient exposure. And patient exposure can always be calculated based on the kind of indication of the product. If a product is given on a daily basis, say for a chronic indication like diabetes, or say for hypertension, so we can basically make a kind of rough assumption by dividing the number of tablets sold by the number of I mean, like say for example, if you know that a particular antihypertensive is given daily, so we can divide that by 365 and we can get an idea of number of patients who have been exposed roughly. Or if there is an antibiotic, If we know that a particular antibiotic is given, say, twice a day for 7 days, so we know that a treatment course will basically be for 14 days. So if we divide that by 14 days, and if we get the patient treatment courses, that in a way gives the number of patients who have been exposed. So based on the indication, based on the kind of drug, we can make some rough calculation. Of course, we have to make some average assumptions, and then we have to figure out what could be the number of patients who could have been exposed with that particular medicinal product. So idea of this section is to provide the exposure in terms of number of patients or number of tablets which are sold. So patient treatment days or patient treatment years or patient treatment courses can be given in this particular section. Then there is a section 6 on data in summary tabulation, and summary tabulation is always at the event level. And whenever there is a meta coding that we do for the cases in the safety database, so we have to basically provide the summary tabulation, and the coding is done at the PT level. So the terms at the PT level have to be given, and of course it has to be segregated by SOC. So for every summary tabulation, we have a SOC level segregation, and then we have the events at the preferred term that has to be provided. And the objective of this particular section is to present safety data through the summary tabulations of serious adverse event from the clinical trials, of course. And when it comes to the post-marketing, we have to provide spontaneous, serious, and non-serious reactions from the post-marketing data, including any report from the healthcare professionals, consumer, literature, or any kind of regulatory authority worldwide. So that's how the data has to be presented. Then we also have to give the summary of any kind of significant finding from the clinical trials during the reporting period. So the finding could be in form of new signals. It could be in the form of any important identified risk or important potential risk. At the end of the day, we also need to see that whenever possible, the data should be categorized by sex and age. If we know that, okay, if there is a particular safety signal coming in children particularly, so versus adult, so that needs to be categorically given. Say in cases of COVID vaccines, if we know that, okay, from the elderly population, we are getting some data which is different from the pediatric population. Say if we get to know that thrombotic complications are happening more in a particular age group, but they may not be happening in relatively lower age group. So all of these things are important from safety perspective. So if there is a restriction, say in elderly population for a particular drug, so that definitely needs to be categorically mentioned, and that's how the safety signals also need to be segregated. So idea of giving this idea of providing the significant finding here in this section is to provide the summaries at the height level. Of course, there are different sections in detail, like section 15, where we have to provide the safety signals, the overview of safety signal. But here we have to just provide the um, overall brief summary. Similarly, the evaluation of signals have to be provided in section 16.2 later. But here we have to just provide the brief summary. Similarly, we have to provide a summary of any new information in relation to any previously known potential or identified risk, or if there is any information on lack of efficacy from the clinical trial. So summary has to be provided in this particular section. Then any kind of findings from the non-intervention studies also have to be provided. So I think if you've looked into the DSO regulation, so they also give something similar to that. So any finding from the non-intervention studies or from other clinical trials. So at the end of the day, from safety perspective, any information has to be provided in these sections, which is important from new safety information perspective, or any non-clinical data. Of course, so, and it's very important that whenever the medical writing team is providing or preparing those sections, so this kind of section has to be taken from the different departments. So if there's a team for non-clinical data, so they should get the data from the non-clinical. And again, the idea is that non-clinical data is if that yields any new relevant safety information, so that information should be captured here. The literature information again is also very important. Idea is not to provide just the abstracts. Idea is to take any new relevant safety information from the literature data and then capture in the PSUR. This is something again similar to the DSUR, wherein we don't give all the abstracts. We just basically take the relevant safety information and then put a summary of that particular information. And of course, if there is a abstract which is having relevant safety information, we have to provide the full detail of that article and everything, so that the clear documentation is there. And if there is any other periodic report, in case that is prepared for a different formulation, and as I mentioned earlier, it could be an exception. So then a rationale has to be given, and an agreement has to be done with the different competent authorities to ensure that they are okay with the other periodic reports. If there is a lack of efficacy in any controlled clinical trial for this medicinal product, so it has to be given. So let me take an example. It's not like we have to provide a line listing or a kind of a summary tabulation for the data for lack of efficacy. It's just that there is a summary of lack of efficacy that has to be provided if it is relevant. Let me take an example. Say if there is a drug for upper GI bleed, and we know that in the market there are different drugs like somatostatin or other splanchnic vasoconstrictor. But say if there is a new medicinal product that is being tried for upper GI bleed, but if we compare the efficacy of this drug with the conventional therapy which is already there in the market, and say if you're getting higher cases of lack of efficacy, and there are patients who are in fact bleeding more, or maybe in fact there is a high mortality in that particular arm which is actually getting this particular medicinal product, so that would be really worrisome. So in those scenarios, whenever there is a lack of efficacy which is relatively higher compared to the conventional therapy which is already established, so in those kind of scenarios we have to provide the summary. Otherwise, it's not that we have to provide a line listing or summary tabulation separately for lack of efficacy. Similarly, if there is a late breaking information that happens after the data log point, so it's important that that information is summarized. So generally, like what many of the companies, what they do is that they would take some line listings just before the date of submission, just to see if there is a new relevant signal that is coming up. And of course, if there is any new relevant safety signal that comes up, so that should be provided. Then the signals have to be provided here in section 15, where if there is a new ongoing or close signal, so they have to be documented. New signals could be the ones which have been identified during that reporting period, which were not there earlier. If there was a signal that was identified earlier, but now it is still ongoing, so there is no concrete data to make a decision whether this is a confirmed signal or not. So if it still doesn't warrant a change in the prescribing information, so it can still remain as ongoing. But yes, if there is a particular signal for which there is no further monitoring required, or maybe the decision is taken that this is not relevant, there is no temporal association, there is no significant causal association, so those kind of signals, if they get closed, or maybe a decision is taken to update the PI and or update the STC, then the decision to close the signals, if it has been done, so that can be documented in this particular section. So then in section 16, we have to mention about risk, whether there is a new important identified risk, any new important potential risk, any kind of risk minimization measures that have been implemented to minimize some risk. So this particular section, which is signal and risk evaluation, should talk in detail about the risk evaluation. And other than that, we also need to give the benefit evaluation in section 17. And this particular section has to mention about the actual conventional therapies which are applicable, what's the new advantage of the medicinal product that we are talking about. So if there is a particular data on efficacy, which is kind of for this particular product for which we are preparing the PSUR, so that has to be given. And then of course the characterization of benefits also have to be provided in this benefit evaluation section. Then there is a section on the integrated benefit risk analysis, and this particular section should provide a description of the medical need for this particular medicinal product. So if there is a kind of an unmet need, and this particular medicinal product is actually fulfilling those requirements for a particular age group or for a particular indication, so it's important that this particular benefit in terms of that unmet need is mentioned. And the benefit risk analysis evaluation is also required to be documented in this section. And lastly, any kind of a PSUR document needs to provide a conclusion. What exactly is the overall benefit risk profile? If there is a change in the benefit risk profile of the product, it has to be mentioned. If there are any new signals, if there are any ongoing signals, if there is any closed signal, they all need to be mentioned. At the end of the day, the idea is that if the overall benefit risk profile remains unchanged, so it should be clearly documented. And if there is any new signal that comes up which places any restriction on a particular age group, or maybe there is a new risk minimization activity that is implemented, so those things are very important and they should be always documented in the conclusion. So I think with this, I would like to uh, close this particular session. Of course, we do have some time. Maybe we can take few questions.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for such a thorough presentation. I can take a couple of questions, and maybe then you can take up the rest. So yeah, with regard to PADERs, I can see a couple of questions. So the first question is, are all literature cases required to be captured in PADERs? And if so, how are they included? So yeah, so this is a good question. So basically, the literature cases which are serious and unexpected and irrespective of the country of origin, so they are required to be included in the PADERs because they were submitted or they had been submitted as 15-day alert reports to the FDA under that particular ANDA, NDA or BLA. But the other cases which are non-serious or serious listed, they are not required to be included in the PADERs. This I'm specifically talking about the literature cases. So for all the serious unexpected literature cases, they have to be included in the list of 15-day alert reports. They have to be included in line listings, included in the summary tabulations as well, and then narrative summary and analysis section also has to be prepared for these literature cases which are assessed as serious and unexpected. I hope this answers your question, and I can take another one. So basically, the next question is about vaccines. So what is the requirement for periodic reports in the US for vaccines? Is there any specific format for that? So yeah, basically this specific guidance document, which is March 2001. So that specifically talks about the requirements for the ICSRs and the periodic reports, both for all for ANDA, NDA, and BLA. So if we see that, and specifically if CFR is 21 CFR 600.80, but the format of the vaccines is not, which is very different. It is similar to the format for the drugs. The only difference is that for the drugs, it is called periodic adverse drug experience reports, and for the biologics, we have to mention periodic adverse experience reports in the PADER documents, which we have to prepare and submit to the FDA or to the CBER. So this is the difference, but with regard to the specific format, there is no specific format. There are specific sections as well. Those 4 sections, and there are some specific things which are required by certain combination products, because the format, FDA keeps on updating the requirements. So if we talk about combination products, so then yes, there are certain specific things which have to be included in the PADER. For vaccines, obviously it has to be like periodic adverse experience reports. Sajeev, you can take a couple of other questions.
Sure, Mugdha. Let me see. I think I can see one question on in the PSURs, is the clinical trial data still required to be incorporated if the DSUR is also being prepared? Yes, I think I know this is something which is quite interesting. But if we look from the regulatory authorities' perspective, they clearly mention, like if you look into GP Module 7 for the PSURs, as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, and I emphasized, yes, there is a requirement. We have to provide the data from the clinical trials. See, at the end of the day, we are talking about active moiety. We are talking about molecule as such. So it's not that, okay, we are preparing the DSUR, so that will cover anyway the clinical trial data, so we don't need to provide that. So DSUR is a document that would still require the data from the clinical trial, and again as well as the post marketing. But when we are providing the PSUR for a product which is now authorized, there is a regulatory obligation that starts, and whenever we are submitting a periodic report to the regulatory authorities, once the authorization has been obtained, the expectation of the regulatory authority is to get the safety for the active moiety. They are not basically just going to be concerned with the safety of any product which is just basically having the post authorization safety data. See, at the end of the day, whether the safety is coming from non-clinical or coming from the clinical trial or coming from the post marketing, as such it's an active moiety, so that is more important. So therefore whether we have the data from irrespective of the data from any source, we have to provide the safety information in different sections in the PSUR. And then I think there's a question on the line listing requirement for lack of efficacy. No, there is no requirement for line listing as such for lack of efficacy. There is no, of course, when we put the summary tabulation, those cases will automatically get captured, because that's how, like if we have a safety database, if we have done the configuration, they will already, the system will automatically pick up any non-serious events, which could be even lack of efficacy. But then in this particular section, I want to emphasize the lack of efficacy section for or the cases of lack of efficacy from controlled clinical trials. See, the important thing is that it's not that we have to provide just all lack of efficacy cases and that's it. No, the idea is to see what's the relevance of the lack of efficacy for a medicinal product. And in fact, if you look into GP7, they've given some examples also. Like say, if we have an antiplatelet medication for coronary artery disease. Now, let us suppose we have a drug like clopidogrel, which is already there in the market as antiplatelet drug, which is given to the patients of coronary artery disease. Now, say if there is a new antiplatelet drug, which is now being practiced or being investigated in a clinical trial, and tomorrow in that particular arm, which is receiving this antiplatelet, newer antiplatelet, we are getting a lot of mortalities or getting a lot of patients who are having recurrent MI, or there is a kind of a lack of efficacy in a way. So obviously then that could be a safety signal or a alarm for everybody, because if there is already a conventional therapy which is giving some decent result, and now we are having a clinical trial with a particular investigational product which is now in fact having a lot of lack of efficacy results, or maybe the patients in that arm are having relatively higher mortality, or there are higher recurrent MI. So obviously in those kind of scenarios where there's a lack of efficacy compared to a standard conventional arm which is already giving at least better results than this particular arm, so then that becomes a signal, and that is what we need to provide. Otherwise there are some cases of lack of efficacy which could be there with any drug, because any drug would not be having 100% efficacy. So in normal scenarios, this section is just we just need to say that okay, there is no relevant lack of efficacy signal. But yes, if we have something which is coming as a safety concern, so then we need to provide all those all the description in this particular section on lack of efficacy. I think, Muda, I know we have some questions, but probably we are running out of time. So if somebody has some other questions, we can probably respond on the emails. All right.
Yeah, sure, Sanjeev. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. And thank you so much for attending the webinar. And we will get back to you with a new webinar soon. Thank you so much for attending. And
Bye,
have
everyone.
a nice day ahead. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.